It's a special schus to be able to have him, and the Eivish is given a sach siyata d'shmaya.
Chazal say in the end of brachas, Chazal say poischem b'chvoy achsanya. I'd like to first of all to be poiseach b'chvoy this achsanya, to thank the Rebbe for his friendship, more than just his friendship, for his hadracha. Anytime I need something, he's always available, speak constantly. I was just thinking what I could say, as I mezok l'chvoy achsanya. Lemaisa, there's a tshuva in the Radvaz, that the Radvaz says that when a person chooses a Beis HaKnesses, a person should choose a Beis HaKnesses shemispalel sham odem godel v'tzadik. So a person should choose a Beis HaKnesses shemispalel sham odem godel v'tzadik. I'd like to add to this a little bit, that we know that Chazal tell us, Rashi in B'Shalach brings it down, Eloikei ovi v'aroi mimenu. What does it mean, Eloikei ovi v'aroi mimenu? So Rashi says, Eloikei ovi lo yanit chilas ha'kedusha. I'm not the beginning of the kedusha. I come from a tremendous shalshelis. Now we know there are ovis and there are ovis. Can't compare. Eloikei ovi v'aroi mimenu. The words before that are zekeli vanveyu. Then it says Eloikei ovi v'aroi mimenu. The Targum says, what does it mean zekeli vanveyu? How does the Targum tie zekeli vanveyu? Evne loy beis magdisha. I'll build for him a beis hamikdash. We know that the Zohar holds that there's a mitzvahs esed or aisa to build a beis haknesses even bisman hazeh. It says v'osu li mikdash. He holds that even bisman hazeh there's a mitzvahs esed to build botei knesiyas. The Bes Yosef brings it down. He's choyle kanim. He says it's not a mitzvahs essay, but either way, he says it's a big beginning. Of course, we know it's an asmachta to build the beis haknesses. These two things go together. Zekeli vanveyu evne loy beis magdisha, Eloikei ovi lo yanit chilas hakedusha. Lo yanit chilas hakedusha. In other words, just to add to the Radvaz, that not just the davene beis haknesses that has an odem godel v'tzadik, but also the davene beis haknesses zekeli Eloikei ovi v'aroi mimenu, the daven by a tzadik who comes from a tremendous shalshelis. Here in the neighborhood, we know if a person is looking for this, a besmedrish, an odem godel v'tzadik who comes from a tremendous shalshelis, it's Zidichov besmedrish. Those who have the good fortune, and might I say the good sense, to daven over here in the Beis HaKnesses, certainly have something that nobody else in the neighborhood has. And once again, I'd like to thank the Rebbe for his friendship and for his adrocha and for everything that he does. So I want to speak a little bit about the Yamim of the Simonim on Rosh Hashanah. It's not something that's so much discussed, the Simonim. I'd like to start with a couple of questions on the Simonim that we all know. The Machaber brings down in Simon Tovkuf Pei Gimel that there's a mitzvah to eat the Simonim. We have an inyan to eat the Simonim later Rosh Hashanah. First of all, as far as the Simonim go, is there a mitzvah to actually eat the Simonim, or do we just look at the Simonim? There are two girsois in the Gemara. There's a girsa in the Gemara in Hodias that the Gemara says Yehei Rogel Lemerzei. It seems to be the Indian is to look at the Simonim, and then there's a girsa the Gemara in Krisus that says Lemeichal. The Bes Yosef brings down both things. The Bes Yosef doesn't really. He brings from some goinim who ate, some goinim who looked, but Lemaisa he doesn't come out. Maybe we'll discuss that. Now, a second thing is b'shas the achil of the Simonim. We have a regilis to say a Yehirotzen. The Yehirotzen is not really, it's not brought down in the Gemara. It's not a question that the Yehirotzen, there are Yehirotzens that are brought down in the Gemara. We know that when a person goes in for a refuah, the Gemara says in Shabbos, he says Yehirotzen, sheheli eisek zel refuah. A person goes in, the Gemara says in Tainis and in Bava Metzia, hanichnas lomud es garnoy, a person goes in, oimer Yehirotzen, shetishlach beracha b'krize. So we see there are Yehirotzens in the Gemara, yet it's interessant over here, in the Gemara of the Simonim, which we'll soon speak about, there is no Yehirotzen. The Yehirotzen is mentioned later. The Mishnah Berurah says to say the Yiratzen b'Shemu Malchus. Even though the Mechaber brings down the Yiratzen, he doesn't bring down the Yiratzen b'Shemu Malchus. The Mishnah Berurah does bring down to make the Yiratzen b'Shemu Malchus. Now, amongst different Gedolim, there were different Hanhagis. Some did say the Yiratzen b'Shemu Malchus, and some didn't. Maybe we'll discuss that. Now, also a third thing, do you eat the Simonim in all the Sudas? Do you eat the Simonim in all the Sudas of Rosh Hashanah? Only the first Suda, the first and the second night. I saw the Ben Ish Chai says, it says, Yehei Odom Rogil. The Ben Ish Chai is Moichiach, from the Lashon Rogil. The Lashon Rogil is at least 3 times. So therefore the Ben Ish Chai says that one should eat the Simonim at all 4 Sudas Rosh Hashanah. It's Yodua from the Bnei Yissaschar. I saw in the time Yamin Hagim, he says Dafka the first night. And the Bnei Yissaschar has a Morid Diuk. The Gemara that we'll soon see, the Gemara says, Yeh Adam Rogil Berei Shaita. We know the Bnei Yissaschar was an unbelievable Goyen. He was a Goyen Olam. And he's Moichiach that when the Gemara talks about Rosh Hashanah as a Yontif, it always uses the Lashon Rosh Hashanah. So he says that when it says in the Gemara of the Simon and Berei Shaita, it means the beginning of the year. It doesn't mean Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, Zog the Bnei Yissaschar, the Simonim are eaten only on the first night. And he says, even though he brings from his Rebbe that he ate them on the other night as well, but he brings a Lashon Loi Chazinon L'Rabbonon Kshishoy D'Avdei Hocha. He says the Simonim are only on the first night. Then he says something. He says like this. He says, we know that the first night of Rosh Hashanah is B'Bchinas Leah. The second night of Rosh Hashanah is B'Bchinas Rachel. Now these things are very much above and beyond me, but we know that the Haftorah for the second day Rosh Hashanah is Rachel Mevaka Al Boneo. So we can understand this even Kipshutoi, that the second day of Rosh Hashanah is a B'china of Rachel based on the Haftorah. He says, and we know that the Rachel, the whole Chashivas of Rachel, that she was Moiser the Simonim to Leah. Kumtachois, that Rachel's ganze Chashivas was, Azot Nish gehat ken Simonim. Memele zog the Bnei Yissaschar, the Simonim are only on the first night, Dafka not on the second night. Now, a general question on this whole inyan is the Shaila the Rishonim ask, already going way, way back, the Mordechai and more. They ask, what about the Isser of Nichush? We know we're so makbid on the Isser of Nichush. We just read yesterday. We just read the other day on Shabbos. Lo yimotze b'cha ma'avir b'noyu bito b'yesh. It's a union of avodah zarah. Lo yimotze b'cha ma'oinein u'menachesh u'mechashev. Zokt Rashi, who is the menachesh? What's a menachesh? He says, Pitoy nofla mipiv, tzvi hifsika baderech, maklo nofla miyodoi. He says like this, that let's say Rashi says in Sanhedrin, a person has a plan to do something, he has his day planned out. He's going to do business, he's going to go here, Pitoy nofla mipiv. His bread falls from his mouth, he says, you know what? Today's going to be a bad day. Today's going to be a bad day. So based on that, he attributes that today is going to be a bad day based on this siman. So that's an Issa Nichush. Maklo nofla mipiv, all these things. If a person is koiveya his asidus, if a person makes plans and he gives credence to these things, it's called Nichush. And we know that the Rishonim say, the Gemara over there brings down, that Loma Nikra Shmon Kshafim, Shemakchishim Pamal Yishal Mala. They weaken, so the Rishonim learn 2 different shatim. Some learn Makchishim is Miloshn Akchosha, like we would say in Yiddish, they laken it up. We know that everything in the world comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. By attributing to a simon, by saying something is going to happen because my bread fell, because my stick fell, that's Akchosha in the Koyach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Some learn that Akchosha is Miloshn Kachash B'chazov, but either way we know there's an Issa Nichush, and already the Mordechai asks, many from the first of the Rishonim, what's going on over here with these Simonim? Rather, it's interesting. There's a losh on the Mordechai, the first Mordechai in Yuma. He writes back. He says, "Shesichaktem oleinu." He said, "You made fun of us." Shanachnu noich shenechishos. So you see, they're making fun. It didn't start today. He already had it in his days. Shesichaktem oleinu. You make fun of us that we're menachshim. We make these simonim on Rosh Hashanah. He says we take the head of a keves, we do this. He says at Havdalah we take the wine, we put it in our pockets. He says Yomamish noich shenechishas. It says in the Torah that it's aser. Grand, it's interessant. There's a Peledig Loshon over there in the Mordechai. He says Yesh nichush shehu toiv. He says Yesh nichush shehu toiv. which is a very interesting lashon. It's a lashon that has to be understood. I mean, I just think, we come to the age of the cholesterol where we have to be makpid. So they tell us there's the good cholesterol and there's the bad cholesterol. But with nichush, it doesn't work like that. There's no good nichush and there's no bad nichush. So what does the Mordechai mean when he says yesh nichush u'toiv? It seems that that's the lashon the Mordechai, such a chomer d'geiser. He says yesh nichush u'toiv. So I'd like to start with the Gemara in Krisus, which is the basis for the Simonim on Rosh Hashanah. It says like this: Ein Moishchin. Over there, the Gemara has all sugyas about Mashiach. The Gemara has all sugyas about the Mashiach HaMalachim, and then the Gemara says Ein Moishchin Malachin Elo Al Yad HaMayin. You're only Moishech a king. You only anoint a king Elo Al Yad HaMayin. And where do we learn that out from? From the Mashiach of Shlomo HaMelech. That David HaMelech says, Vayomer HaMelech Chu Yimochem Ma'avdei Adonechem. Take with you v'hoiradetem oisoi al gichoin u'mashachtem oisosam. You should be Moishech Shlomo HaMelech. You shouldn't be Moishech him anywhere. Dafke next to the river Gichoin, which is nowadays, which is known as the Shiloach. That was the river Gichoin. Now the Gemara says, why was it necessary to be Moishech him by Gichoin? Kedei shetimashech malchusoi. It was a siman. Now Rav Ami says, once we're discussing simonim, that there are Moishech him dafke alamayin kedei shetimashech malchusoi. Zokt Rav Ami. Haiman de boy lemeida. Once we're discussing simonim, he gives 3 simonim. Haiman de boy lemeida imasik shaita yoloi. A person wants to know, is he going to live out the year? The Gemara says, nitli sharge, light a candle, ba'asora yoime de bein Rosh Hashanah yoime Kippurim, and see, imashach nahoira is good. Interessant, we're going to soon speak, that we're going to give 3 cases over here where the Gemara says to make these simonim. We're going to soon see the Marsha. It's interesting that when the Gemara presents the Simonim, Haiman de boy lemeida imasik shaite iloi. In other words, when we present it, it's imasik shaite iloi. Yet when the Gemara gives the actual Simon, the Marsha points out, we'll soon see, he only says the positive side. That he says he should light a candle, and if the candle lights and it doesn't go out, he'll know that it's masik shaite. Interessant. He doesn't say chaz v'sholem, and if the candle goes out, it's loy masik shaite. Diuk from the Marsha, we'll soon see. The next simon that he gives, Haiman de boy lemeipak leiske. A person wants to go into business, and he wants to know if the asik is going to be matzliach. So the Gemara says, lir b'tana goyla. He should raise a chicken, and he should see ishamin v'shaper. If it fattens nicely, then he'll know he'll be matzliach. The third thing that he says, a person is going out l'urucha, a person is traveling, and he wants to know if he's going to make it back home. So the Gemara says, he should go into a dark house and light a candle. Ichazi bavua de bavua. If he sees a shadow of a shadow, then he knows, which is something that we see b'noigeya hoishan rab as well, this bavua de bavua. But either way, the Gemara gives 3 simonim. If he wants to know he's going to live out the year, he wants to know he's going to be matzliach in business, or he wants to know he's traveling, he wants to know if he's going to make it back. 3 simonim. Now the Gemara says v'lav milsehi. The Gemara says v'lav milsehi. Don't do it. Dilma chol shadaita umisra mazle. In other words, maybe he was really supposed to make it back, or maybe he was really supposed to be. And fakir the chalisha sadas, from the fact that the simon didn't work out, that will give him a mazal ra. Dilma chol shadaita, the chalisha sadas, will make him a mazal ra. Now the question is, when the Gemara says v'lav milsehi, we just gave 3 simonim. When it says v'lav milsa, does it mean that he shouldn't do any one of the 3 simonim? Or maybe? So Rashi clearly says that when it says v'lav milsa, he is going only on the 3rd simon. In other words, the first simon, where a person wants to know he's going to live out the year, light the candle, halt Rashi, is a good simon, against the stone. The second simon of going to business, raising the tarnagoil, that's a good simon, you could do it. It's only the 3rd simon of a person wants to know he's traveling and coming back. Zok Rashi, don't do it. Not because there's anything wrong with the simon. It's just that happens to be a shvacha simon. It's not going to work. It's very mashma like Rashi, because the next words in the Gemara are Omer Abaye, Hashte da Amrit Simne Milsa, now that we say that a siman is something, Yehei Adam Rogel Lemerzi, this Gemara has the gears of Lemerzi to see, Berei Shaita, Kara, Rubia, Salke, Tamre, Remoini, all the things that we do. Now, if the Gemara just said Velav Milsa, that you shouldn't do Simonim, so what's Abaye saying? Hashtet Amret Simon Milsa. Mom Dechesh Gezog Velav Milsa. What's Simon Milsa? Very, very mashma like Rashi, that the only siman that you don't do is the third siman. Not because we have something against simonim, it's just that it happens to be a shvacha siman. Now, we asked the question about these simonim. We asked a general question that we say the Rishonim ask, what about nichush? The Maharsha over here asked the question, and of course he's magdim. What we just said a minute ago, he asked the question, when Rav Ami starts the heading, will he live out the year or not? Will he be matzliach in business or not? Yet when the Gemara speaks to Siman, the Gemara says he should light the candle, and if the candle lights, he'll live. But the other tzad, the Gemara doesn't speak out, that if the candle doesn't light, he won't live. The fattened chicken, he says, if the chicken gets fattened, he'll be matzliach in business. But what about the Agdoma? He said, I matzlach iloi. So why don't you say if the chicken? So Zog the Maharsha like this. Tremendous chidush. The Maharsha says like this. He says, L'choira, he asked the question, what about nichush? Like we said, Zog the Maharsha, Amori de Gezach. And the Yisoid is Betzim in the Ramchal, and the Yisoid is in many other Svarim. But the Maisa, I think the Maharsha is the only one who applies this to the Isser Nichush. To me, it was a tremendous chidush. The Maharsha says like this. The Maharsha says, we know there's a Yisoid that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a makor of only Toiv. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a makor of only Toiv. There's no Ra that comes down from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is what the Ramchal says also. Many say it. The Ra in the world doesn't come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why is there Ra in the world? Why is there Ra in the world? He brings a pasuk, Avonoseichem hoyu mavdilim beinu v'nechem. He says the Ra in the world only comes from the fact that al yidei avonos, unfortunately, a mechitza or other things, a mechitza is put up between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but there's no Ra in the world. There's no mitzias of Ra that comes. The Ra is the heder atoiv. When the toiv is gone, but like, there's a klare, the Sifsei Chachamim clares in the beginning of Bereshis. Is choshech a creation? Is darkness actually a creation? Or is choshech just a heder of Ra? He speaks about also in the Makas choshech. Zog the Heilige Maharsha that there's no mitzias of Ra. There's a mitzias of toiv, but there's no mitzias of Ra. Zog the Maharsha, therefore, toiv, the Lashon of the Maharsha is that toiv is something which is behechlet. Toiv, that's why he says, Chazal say, that mo'olam lo yotza gzar din le'toiv v'chazra. Because once something toiv comes out from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's never choizer. Because he says toiv comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, toiv is behechlet. Ra doesn't come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, therefore Ra isn't behechlet. Zog the Maharsha Moridik, that the Isser Nichush is only Nichush on something Ra. Because when a person is menachesh on something toiv, he's not attributing or validating or giving credence to something that's chutz from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Fakert, all toiv in the world comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So when a person is menachesh letoiv, he says he's giving credence, he's giving validation to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Masha Enkein, he says, when a person is menachesh, he makes a similar ra. He says he's giving credence, he's giving validation, he's saying that the ra is behechlet, and to say that the ra is behechlet, since the Ra doesn't come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is he's giving koyach, he's attributing koyach to something that doesn't come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is avodah zara, that is nichush. Memela, as we'll go through our questions, I just want to add one thing to Maharsha. We know that the Ramban, very Meforsim, says on the pasuk Vayavar Avrohom ba'aretz ad mekoim Shechem. So the Ramban says these would all seem to be stories. The stories with the Avos that Avrohom was over Mokem Shechem. Is there Ramban in here? Okay, I'll say it by heart. Okay, no, it's fine. So the Ramban says that all that we saw that the Avos did, all the Maisim that we saw that the Avos did, So he says like this. He says, the famous Rambani says, B'gzeidas irin pizgomin. B'gzeidas irin pizgomin. When there's a gzeira that comes down min hashamayim, when there's a gzeira that comes down min hashamayim, so what do the others do? To be moitziyit min hakoyach el poyel dimyon. Now, poyel dimyon means, we translate in English, a symbolic act. In other words, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises toiv, he promised the toiv, it's bekoyach. The others all did symbolic acts, and that's why we're so meidich in the Sipurei Ovis, Yofas Yichosin Shalav de Ovis, because everything in the Ramban goes through actually history, goes through history there, all the Pa'ulis that the Ovis did that had effects on history. So that's what he says, that when the Ovis did, he brings from the Nevi'im, everything that they did symbolic acts. He calls it a Poyel Dimyon. When Avrohom Avinu lay down and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was mekapel the whole Eretz Yisrael underneath him. Why was that necessary? HaKadosh Baruch Hu had given him a haftocha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu had given him an haftocha. He wanted to be moitzi the haftocha min hakoyach al hapoyal. So what did he do? He did what the Ramban calls a poyel dimyon, a symbolic act. And al yedei the symbolic act, memela he started it, and once it started, we know, like we said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's toiv is never nepach lara. Memela, I was thinking that according to Maharsha, together with this Ramban, it's a very new look on the Simonim on Rosh Hashanah. In other words, a person is supposed to believe, a person is supposed to be a maimin, like we said that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Mekar HaToiv. He's supposed to believe, he has to believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be made of him. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be made of him. As we know, the minig is that we don't wish each other L'shana Tova, Teichasa v'Seichasem, Rosh Hashanah in the afternoon, because we should all assume that like tzaddikim, we were nechtam l'chaim already. A person has to assume good. But how is he moitzi that good min hakoyach al hapoyal? How is he moitzi that good min hakoyach al hapoyal? He wants a shana toivu mesuka. But we know Avrohom Avinu was promised avtoches. He wasn't mistapik with the promise. He did things. Vayavar Avram ba'aretz. He did things. So too it could be according to Maharsha that we know and we're minding that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was maftiach as a shana toivu mesuka. But what do? We eat the apple, we dip it in honey to do a poyel dimyon, to be moitzi HaKadosh Baruch Hu's gezeira l'toiv min hakoyach al hapoyel. The achilas, the simonim, like the Maharsha says, there's no iser nichush if it's l'toiv. The simonim are a real thing, there's no iser nichush, and we're moitzi everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has for us min hakoyach al hapoyel al yedei the achilas simonim. Now, we asked a couple of questions. What's the proper way? Is it lemeichal or is it lemerze? I'm sorry, can I have a little bit of water? I'm sorry, I'm not an experienced speaker. I get anshuldiks, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, water is fine. Anshuldiks, I'm sorry. No, thank you. Right, so this is what we said. So we started out with a question about the simonim. Is it lemerze or is it lemeichal? So we started out in the beginning in the simonim. Is it lemerze or is it lemeichal? According to Maharsha that we said and the Ramban that the simonim are a real thing, it's not just to be ma'ored us. According to Ramban, and the Maharsha, like we tell Su, of course a person would have to eat the simonim. Just like Avrohom Avinu, when he wanted to bring HaKadosh Baruch Hu's gezeira min hakoyach al hapoyal, he did maisim, vayavar Avram ba'aretz. The Ramban goes through 5 or 6 cases in the Novi where the Nevi'im did things to be moitzi min hakoyach al hapoyal. So therefore, according to Maharsha's Havon and the simonim, like we understood, of course it would be lemeichal, it wouldn't be lemerze. You have to eat it. The second question we asked, is it tefillah appropriate? Do we say a yiratzon or not? I forgot to mention before, but the Maharshal says dafke not to say yiratzon. The Maharshal, he says malet tefillah b'shas achila. What does it bother the Maharshal? Malet tefillah b'shas achila yofet tzakal adam. Well, what does it bother? I think that based on what we just said, that the avoid of the simonim is davke to do a ma'isa like Avrohom Avinu. His avoida then, it wasn't an avoida of tefillah. It was vayavar Avrohom ba'aretz ad mekoim Shechem. It was an avoida of a maisa to be moitzi the gzeirim and hakoyach lapoyal. So therefore, fakert, we don't say a tefillah, and the Marshal is adamant not to say a tefillah because that's not the avoida of the simonim. The third question that we asked: should we do the simonim at every suda, or should we do the simonim only at the first suda? I think based on what we're saying now from the Marshal, that the simonim are to be moitzi the gzeira ben hakoyach lapoyal. Once again, a person supposed to be ma'imid that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mechadish Ashana Toiva Mesuka. So once he's done it the first time, he has to believe that he was moitzi the gzeira ben hakoyach lapoyal. There's no purpose, there's no point in doing it again. You do it only once. Okay, Lemaisa, there is a different shita. This Marshal is a big chidush because we know that nichush is an iser. Einochanami his yisoid, like I said, that toiv only comes in hashamayim, ra doesn't come in hashamayim. That's not the yisoid. That's the yisoid that many say. But to apply it to nichush and to say lemaisa that letoiv a person could be benachesh, that could be a very big chidush. The Keren Oira asks on the Marshal, that how could you say that letoiv there's no nichush? Letoiv there's no nichush. He brings a Gemara in Chulin that Rav said in Chulin Daf Tzadikei, I ose mabra lapoi is yoyme tov. He said like this: if I see a raft, some agoides mabra means a pregnant woman or a sailor, but lemaisa he says simone tov. It's going to be a good simon. Which means Rav said, if I see the raft or I see the sailors coming, he said it's going to be a good simon. Frag the Gemara, how could he do this? It's in Isa Nichush. Frag the Keren Oira, what do you mean it's in Isa Nichush? According to Marshal, it was a simon toiv. So according to Marshal, that there's no Nichush in a simon toiv, is what's the issue? We know also there's a big machloikis between the Rambam and the Ravid as to whether the nichush that Eliezer Rabbi Avrohom did, whether it was muter or not. The Rambam holds that the nichush that Eliezer Rabbi Avrohom did, it was koydem matan Torah, but it's a nichush that's also. The Ravid is choylek on the Rambam. He says, how could it be, that Eliezer Rabbi Avrohom did something also? But many Rishonim learn, Rashi B'soichom learns that the nichush that Eliezer Rabbi Avrohom did when he made the simonim by Rivka, okay, so the question is, according to Marshal, all these were simonim letoiv. So the question is, why would there be an iser nichush? Why would the Rambam paskin halacha lemaisa that a nichush, like the nichush that Eliezer Rabbi Avrohom did, is aser? Therefore, based on this, the Keren Oira doesn't really. But I'd like to read a Meiri who has a very, very different mahalach in the simonim, extremely, extremely different than the Marshal. Okay, so the Meiri says like this: Harbe dvarim hutru lefa'amim shehem doimim lenachash. Many things are muter that they're similar to nichush. Veloy miderech nachash cholila. He says cholila, it's not miderech nachash. Ela derech simen la'oirer boy levavoy lanhoge toiva. It's a simen to be ma'oirer him to anhoge toiva. V'husha omru litein al shulchanoi beleil Rosh Hashanah kare rubia kare sesalke. Shehem minyonim mehem shagdei lemaher umehem shagadlusam oila harbe ukidei. Once again, first of all, he says cholila, it's not nachash. The Marshal says not nachash. He says cholila ukidei shaloi likoshel behem lashos derech nachash. Once again, he says we shouldn't be nichshal. Tiknu loymar aleim dvorim amoirim lechuva. He says you must say a tefillah, because if you're going to eat these simonim and not say a tefillah, it's going to be doimel lanachash. So he says, Fakert, you must say it. And there are even Girsois, I saw in the Mordechai, maybe he brings down that Rav Hai Goin, we know many times the Goinim added things into the Gemara. Toisus brings down many times that Ein Zeh Miloshna Gemara, but it was added. Rav Hai Goin actually added this into the Gemara. V'hu shoimrim bekara, rotzoloima v'rubia, aval advorim shenasim b'derech nachash, cholila ein pikbuk b'isurim. V'husha Omar Heina al Ktsas b'nei Odom shemaschilim b'schoira megadlen tarnegol al shemos eschoira v'munas yofa boitchim ushar dvarim hinei Omar al kulam v'lav mil sehi. So this is the key. Remember, when we started out, we said that the Marshal is going with Rashi, that when it says v'lav milsa is going only on the third siman. when a person wants to travel, he happens to say that siman isn't a good siman. But according to Rashi, the first two simanim are good simanim. Based on that, and based on what the Mordechai says, yesh nichush shehu toiv, the Maharsha says his whole shtickle Torah that nichush letoiv isn't a problem. The Miri says no way. The Miri says that when the Gemara says valav milsa, it's going back on all simanim. All simanim are unacceptable. There's a chashash nichush in all simanim. How do we do the simanim on Rosh Hashanah at night? How are we allowed to do them? Zog de Meiri, because we're mispalal. And when we're mispalal, and we do it only as a sort of tshuva. And he finishes off Kaloimar, ve'ein roi livtoyach al elu ha'havolim, v'asiyosem asura al haderech shabiyarnu b'sanhedrin v'abiteach b'shem chesed yisovivenu. So we see rather such an extreme achloikis that the Maharsha says that on a dover toiv there's no nichush, and the Meiri and other Rishonim again and again say chalila, chalila, chalila. You can't do these things. So how do we get out of the issue? How do we get out of the inyan of nichush? There's one way to get out of the inyan of nichush, and that's al yedei saying a tefillah. And these things are just to be ma'order us l'tshuva. So either way, we have a mahalach Rosh Hashanah at night in the Simonim. One wants to go like the Maharsha, can certainly go like the Maharsha, to believe that there's no nichush, and the Simonim are actually something, to be mechaven, like we said, b'gzeira simin pizgomin, when he eats his apple, when he eats his kara, when he eats his silka, that he's being moitzi min hakoyach al hapoyal. He's choishish, like the Meiri, maybe it's taka nichush, that he could always do, to be mis'oyer l'tshuva, and to say the Yehirotzain, and is there Mishabura Chelik Vav? I'm sorry, I should have bought. I'm just going to finish off with Mishabura. I'm just going to read from the. Sorry. Tov Tay Gimel. We'll finish with this. Just say a marshal from the Dubra Magid. Okay. Dvarim shenoagim lechol b'lei Rosh Hashanah. Simen Tov Kuf Bei Gimel. Zog de mechaber yehei adam ragil lechel b'Rosh Hashanah rubye dainu tilson karsi ukshayoichal rubye yoyme yehi rotzen shayir b'zchuy yiseinu. The mechaber does not bring to say the yehi rotzen b'shem Hashem. The mechaber does not bring to say the yehi rotzen b'shem Hashem, but the Mishabura says yehi rotzen milfarnecha Hashem Elokeinu v'lakei aviseinu shayir b'zchuy yiseinu. That he should say it b'shem Hashem. Yehirotzna Hashem Elokeinu v'chosav al Yerabah b'shem Shlo yis'oyer rodem b'tshuva kishayoyma yirotzen v'yispalel al ze b'leiv shalom. The Mishabura stresses that the Yehirotzen should be said b'shem u'malchus, and he should be mispalel, be misoyer l'tshuva b'leiv shalom. It could be that the Mishabura was makpid and even moisif on the mechaber. The mechaber could be was a little bit on the fence, maybe. So mainly he says to say the Yehirotzen. But the Mishabura maybe was so convinced like the Meiri, not like the Maharsha, so he says, Adarabah, you say it b'shem u'malchus, like the Lashon the Meiri, chalila, b'derech nachash, to say it dafke b'shem u'malchus, to show that it's dafke tefillah, and it's dafke soiris tshuva. As we know, the Rishonim tell us that if a person, it's only a bracha, God, it's kedai to know, it's only a bracha that a person isn't allowed to say levatola b'shem u'malchus. Aber Lama Zogen, the Rishonim say, a person wants to make up his own tefillah, a person wants to make up his own Yehirotzen. The Mater Ephraim says, and others say, it's mutter to say b'shem u'malchus. Could be that's why the Mishabura stresses dafke to say b'shem u'malchus. The dafke holds that it's dafke to soiris tshuva, not so much al derech under Maharsha, but either way, kol levav is doirish Hashem, and lemaisa everyone can have their own mahalach in the Simonim. I just want to finish off with a marshal of the Dubna Magid, that the Dubna Magid Taka asks, and I think you see from this marshal, the Dubna Magid learned that Simonim are not just as if symbolic, Simonim are actually something. For the Dubna Magid, we know in Yiddishkeit there are no shortcuts. There are no shortcuts in Yiddishkeit. All of a sudden it comes Rosh Hashanah, we do Simonim, Shayir B'zchuy Yiseinu, all these things that he says, what's going on? The Shevet Musar also asks it, the Shevet Musar has a mahalach, but the Dubna Magid says an unbelievable marshal. The Dubna Magid says like this. He says it's a marshal to two soichrim who bring in schora to a country. He says one soicher does everything above books. He brings it in on the books. He brings it in, he pays his customs, he has legal workers, workers' compensation, everything by him, he pays his taxes, everything is above board. There's another Yid in the city who also has a business, but fakert, everything is schwarz, everything is under the table, he smuggles everything in, doesn't pay any taxes, his workers are all illegal. They come to the person who lives with this Hazov Mezok, this schwarze business, and they tell him, look, your friend is making a nice living, he's being very, very matzliach, and he's doing everything honestly. What do you have to have a business like this? That's a schwarze business, that's not honest. You don't pay taxes, going to be Chil Hashem, going to be this, going to be that. So he says, what are you talking about? He says, Yener has a chain of 30 stores. He brings in schoira every year in the tens of millions. No, Memela, he makes 2-3% profit. He's already ahead of the game. He's already a tremendous gvir because he works on such a huge volume. Okay, me, he says, what? I have one little store on the corner. And he says, you see, Lamaisa, he says, even with my markup, even with my profit of 30-40%, I'm still struggling and I don't have bread to put on the table. Zog the Dubna Magid, he says, the Doides HaKadmonim didn't need Simonim. Baruch Hashem, they could come Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, they could come, even small achuzim, they had so much, that even small percentages were enough. They didn't have to come on to Simonim, they didn't have to cut corners. But Onu Bani Yuseini Bizmanazeh, and he writes around his times, he says, if we're going to come with what we have, if we're going to go legitimately, if we're going to go Derech HaMelech, we're all going to be in big trouble. He says, therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Bechazdo realizes this and allows us on Rosh Hashanah to go B'derech Simonim. He brings Tashlich and this that we don't sleep, and all these things that the shofar itself on Rosh Hashanah, the Maharsha, the Rambam says, if you look through the whole avoid of Rosh Hashanah, is Davkin avoid of Simonim, and this is like the Dubna Magid said, the special chesed from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he realizes how lacking we are, else how lacking I am, and the Maisa like this, he allows us to have Simonim and to make it easier for us. Thank you. I want to thank the Rebbe again for having me speak here. Such a chashuv olam. I want to wish the olam, and thank you everyone for coming. Aksivich simatay v'agud gebenst jar. Thank you. Okay.